Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion. My name is Edith, and again, as you can see, dear listeners, dear friends, dear subscribers, no chattering teacup. She's again doing what teacups do, tea things. Indeed, our dear CEO is still not clear about how he will end his evening out and about roaming the estate or snoozing away next to the radiator. But here with me is physician, author JL Lycette. And here she is. Hello, Jennifer, and thank you for being so generous after the disaster, all on my end, for doing this again.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm glad to be here today.
It's lovely to have you back, and thank you for being here again. And we are here. I said before I hit the record button, there's a lot to talk about. Your second book, The Committee Will Kill You Now, a medical thriller, came out in November 23. It's actually a prequel to your first book, The Algorithm Will See You Now, which came out in March 23. Both are medical thrillers. You are a physician, you are a doctor, and there is a lot to talk about in both your books because they are a teeny tiny bit scary.
Yeah, I didn't intend for them to be scary, but I definitely have been getting some reviews along that line, just people telling me, I guess because of their own experiences in the medical system, that they find it too hitting a bit too close to home.
I can imagine that. But let's start with the new one. What can you tell our listeners, the people who are going to watch this episode, about The Committee Will Kill You? The screen is all yours.
Well, thank you. So The Committee Will Kill You Now is medical fiction set in the 1990s in Seattle, and it's about a young intern, Noah Meyer, and he is a character in my first book that we meet him much older, and this story goes back and tells his story starting when he is an intern in 1990s Seattle. And I do have in the blurb and the front of the book, I want to make sure very clear a content warning about physician suicide. So the book starts out where he is trying to deal with the stresses and the sleep deprivation and everything that comes with being an intern. And he learns of the death by suicide of another intern. And instead of being able to take time to grieve, they all are simply told to keep working, which he tries to do, but then he makes a terrible mistake. And the book then from there is about the outcome of that mistake, and it incorporates a lot of real life medical history, including sort of the birth of medical transparency about error in the US medical system. And he, in his search for basically making this right and finding himself in the process, he finds an old journal of his father's who he had a complicated relationship with, and his father is deceased and was an esteemed surgeon. But in finding this journal, he finds out about a dark history that his father was involved with in the 1960s that pulls in true life medical history of the first dialysis in the United States, which was in Seattle. And because they had such limited capacity, they essentially rationed the healthcare, asking a basically like secret committee, which came to be known as the God Committee, to make basically life and death decisions about who would receive the care or not. So That was, I know, a long introduction. I've got to work on my log line. That wasn't exactly a log line.
No, it's all good. It's wonderful. Great, great. What you told us, or what you told those who haven't read the books. I've read the book, and there's still a lot you haven't mentioned because we do not want to give too much away, of course. And by reading the book and everything that goes on behind the scenes is also a tiny bit scary, to be quite honest, from the patient's point of view. There is also another character in your book, which, for those who have read book number 1, is familiar to them. His colleague, the one who trains as a surgeon, her name is Mara Maddox, and she appears to be a very ambitious young woman, and her story is, on the one hand, one where you realize as a reader, I know where she comes from. I get her, in a way. On the other hand, events that happen in book number 2 also makes you think, one could also say she's a bit ruthless.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to describe her. So Mara Maddox is the antagonist in the first book, The Algorithm Will See You Now. And in that book, I first introduced her. She is similar to Noah, far along in her career. The Algorithm Will See You Now is set in the near future, in basically about 10 years from now. So when I wrote The Algorithm Will See You Now, as writers know, when you develop your characters, you have to figure out what happened to them to make them the way they are. So in writing Maura's character, I hint at some of this in the first book, but a lot of it never goes on the page because, of course, you don't want to just do what's called info dump. So, but in developing her character, I think, like, I started to have this idea, like, I at some point wanted to tell her story, like her quote unquote villain origin story. And so even though Noah is the protagonist in The Committee Will Kill You Now, it's also Mara's story, and it's their story of the two of them together as well. And along with the other interns and residents in the book, really, and I'm not sure I realized I was doing this until I finished the book, but I think what I was trying to do was show how the same system, how people can come out of that. Some people profoundly damaged that never recover, and other people who are able to make it through. And that is unfortunately what the real life medical trainee system does or did. And so that was, I think, really what I was trying to do with their different paths.
Mm. And what you mentioned again in the book, in the second part of the book, you said there is this suicide by one of their colleagues, and it is mentioned again, and Noah talks to one of his colleagues and they talk about what happened and so on. And one of the colleagues says, there are about 300 people each year who commit suicide, students or interns. And I had to look it up. I really did. And I was shocked to realize that it wasn't just in the past, it seems. It's still prevalent in the medical field today.
Yeah, that's a very sad statistic that, I agree from my research as well, hasn't changed. And one of the interesting things that's also happened as I've had some of the non-medical people in my life, like friends and family who aren't in medicine, read the book, and they like hesitate, and then they bring it up at the end and they say, that's not still happening, is it? And when I tell them it is, they're completely shocked. And so although of course, the job of any book is to tell a story, but also my purpose is also to raise awareness as well.
Mm. And there's something else which we also talked about last time, was the fact that, and you also mentioned it this time, there's those long hours, the sleep deprivation, and they have to function for hours on end. And there was this case in New York, which I also looked up, which you mentioned in your book, which happened in the 80s, where a young woman died because there was I would say there was a miscommunication or a lack of knowledge, which was put at the doorstep of the residents, of the interns, which was rather unfair.
Yeah, so that's some more real life history that I incorporated. And this was the case that received a lot of press in the 1980s and ultimately was the catalyst that led to work restriction hours for medical residents and interns. And of course, all I know is what's in the public record. And from my research, I don't have any inside knowledge or anything like that. But because I trained in the late 90s, this case was still very much in the public eye and in the eye of the medical world. And even though they passed, I shouldn't say passed because it's not like it's a law, but basically there are medical trainee organizations and the residency accreditation programs. And out of this case, they advocated for the work hours. And so hospitals took a long time actually to gradually unfold to that, which I mentioned in my author's note in the back of the book, because I was an intern in 2000 to 2001. And it was halfway through that year that the program that I attended made the shift. So it took a couple decades actually to completely become part of all residency programs. But I realize, as I get older, because again, I graduated from medical school in 2000, that a lot of current trainees and the public don't know that history. So it was something that, it's not a big part of the book. Like you said, it's two of the characters discussing it, but I wanted to definitely include that as well.
It was interesting to learn also that those programs or this cut in work hours didn't happen nationwide. It just happened for this particular area.
Yeah, it was a very slow unfolding. So yeah, it started in New York, which is where the case happened, and the young woman's name was Libby Zion, and she was an 18-year-old who was admitted with what appeared to be what they thought was an infection, but then had what they think later determined was an unusual medication reaction, and that very sadly was fatal. And she was only 18 years old and she died. And her family was very prominent. I don't remember the details. I think perhaps a politician, but they really made it a mission to not only figure out what happened, but then to drive change so it wouldn't happen to anyone else.
And speaking of your characters, Noah, as your main character, he's the focal point of the story in the second book. But like you said, also his relationship, his backstory for the first book with Mara, but also the other residents. Where did he come from? Where did you get the idea for his character? But also, maybe the question is, where did Mara come from as the antagonist?
Yeah, those are such great questions. So, I mean, it's not like any one person or anything like that, but certainly, I mean, it's both archetypes as well as, certainly people I've interacted with in my, 20 plus year career. And so in the first book, Noah is very much the wise mentor and the, uh, just very kind, calm, wise, experienced physician who brings, like his calming presence and expertise to the situation. And so I've definitely been fortunate enough to work with people like this and have mentors like that in my career. And so I certainly brought that in as well as just, he definitely serves the role as the mentor archetype in book one. And then Mara as the antagonist. So she in book one, so they're both in their 60s in that book. And, she's worked her way all the way up the ladder to the top of this corporation. And she's made it her mission to basically use technology to make healthcare better. But her flaw is that she's rather, by that point, lost her moral compass and justifies doing things basically with the mindset of, well, the greater good. Is the priority. And if some people are affected in a bad way, but it's for the greater good, then she, that's basically how she justifies things to herself. And so then going back to telling their backstory, I really bring in a lot of the things that she had to deal with in her early career as a young woman trying to be a surgeon, and all the misogyny and the patriarchy and the, basically tough shell she had to put on herself to succeed with that. And, you use the word ruthless, and that is definitely what she becomes. And I think, what I wanted to do is show that even though she's this ruthless character on the outside in the first book, like she actually uh, basically is a rather damaged and flawed person on the inside. Um, and hopefully characters find, if they read both books, that they'll, well, I won't give any spoilers. They can decide if she gets any redemption in the end or not. I guess I will just leave it at that.
I mean, she's of the opinion that a few for the many, isn't she?
Yeah. Yes.
They're worth the sacrifice. Well, I don't suppose they were asked, so they couldn't make up their mind about being sacrificed for the greater good. But hey, you already mentioned that she had to put up with a lot, especially in your second book, and Noah is witness, and it doesn't sit well with him. And one wonders reading this, because book number 2 takes place, you mentioned it, in the 90s. One might think that the 90s were more enlightened. But obviously, we are wrong. And when you think of today's sometimes climate and how women are viewed in certain areas, nothing has changed that much, has it?
Yeah, I think certainly in the US, and I'm sure other places in the world as well, we're seeing that we haven't made as much progress as we thought, and things are in some areas definitely gone backwards. And I think too, like, one of the things that really inspires me is seeing the next generation of women, the young interns and trainees now, seeing them be so outspoken on social media. And I haven't been on social media for a long time because until I started writing, like I felt like my life was just too busy. But then when I started writing, like I did start getting involved in social media for the writing community. And then of course I started making connections, more medically on social media as well. And I felt like actually quite horrified and disappointed that these young women were not having a better experience than I had. And I think we might have talked about this. I don't remember if we talked about this in our first conversation, but like basically Gen X, like I feel like, like kind of like Mara does in the book, like we were just taught like, just work hard, keep your head down, don't complain, like just, get to the level that you need to get to and everything will get better and this will all go away because then we will all be present more, we'll be in the upper ranks and then, everything will just naturally unfold and get better. And so in some ways, I feel like we've let down the next generation because we did keep it all to ourselves. And so now when I see young women speaking out, it first of all, it just really inspires me that they are and they're being so brave. And, but then secondly, I feel like, well, now it's our time to speak up too, because, we thought like things were going to be better for our daughters and the next generation. And, it's not the way it's unfolding at all.
Unfortunately not, no. And now that you mentioned it, this keep your head down and put up with it and get over it. And one day it's all over and you are the surgeon in charge of the operation and so on. It is a certain kind of code of silence, or was a code of silence in one particular way. But there is also another code of silence which is mentioned in your book, and there is this closing of ranks among the doctors, because you said when you introduced your book that Noah made a mistake, and the advice is, or the order even is, shut up, don't admit anything, don't, least of all to the patient or the patient's family. We're closing ranks and we're making sure nothing comes out for us and for the hospital. Do you think, or would you say that it's a bit similar to the way sometimes police close the ranks when something happens? Could we compare it to this kind of closing ranks?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can't, I don't have any connections or inside knowledge with anyone in the police. But yeah, I intentionally wanted to set the book back in the early 1990s because it was before a big change in the US, so in 1999, there was a big report from the Institute of Medicine that basically opened people's eyes to the number of medical errors in the United States, and it led to huge change within hospitals and doctors' approaches too to what happens if mistakes are made, and basically led to our current era, which is one that's very pro transparency. And so again, because I entered internship in 2000. So a lot of our training was actually part of this new culture of transparency, which has continued to improve and get better in the current day. But again, because I was in training at the time of this shift happening, I was exposed to people who were in the mindset of how it was before. And so I just found it a very interesting time to explore and set my characters, because basically, yeah, it was before this big movement for medical transparency. It was obviously many years before the Me Too movement. And so I basically was able to put my poor characters in this pressure cooker of all these things that happened to them.
And another question would also be in this in this case, but in other cases as well, in your book, other books as well, coping mechanism and also in reality. Because you already mentioned mental health, the importance of mental health, especially again for doctors. Physician, heal thyself. Yeah, well, it's not always that easy, is it? And the amount of alcoholism within the medical field as a coping mechanism, how prevalent do you think is it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have any statistics on that on the top of my head. And I think I might have mentioned this book last time too, when we talked, but if I didn't, I want to for sure mention it because it's so good. It's a memoir by a physician, Dr. Adam Hill, and it's called Long Walk Out of the Woods. And he is a physician who experienced alcoholism and addiction and depression and came very close to ending his life and thankfully got help. And he's made it his mission now to bring transparency to the importance of mental health for physicians of all levels, from students all the way up to, like 30-year veterans. And so it's very eye-open and wonderfully done. And he raises some great comparisons about how, like when someone has a physical injury, like let's say they broke their leg and they're on crutches, it's very visible. And so everybody, provides support and help. Even though sadly the doctor's probably not taking any time off work and coming to work on crutches. So the way he writes about and makes these comparisons, I think was just so eye-opening about, depression, which often, goes hand in hand with addiction. Many people take alcohol or use substances to try to self-treat or self-medicate because, again, there's this stigma in the medical world that is finally getting a bit better. But, even like in some states, when you go to get your credentialing, like if you disclose that you've asked for help or had treatment for depression, you might lose your license. And so there's this pressure on physicians not to seek help. And so that book, if for people who want to read more and again, the experience of a memoir, and it's very uplifting and inspiring as well.
And to help physicians get in their work or in the line of work is important for your first book. I mean, let's call it Help, because the title is The Algorithm Will See You Now. One gets the idea the algorithm decides more than just being helpful or helping the doctors with the correct diagnosis. And that's also a bit scary. I mean, it is set in the future, but still, there is a lot of talk these days about AI and what it can do, what it should do, what it shouldn't do. But I think, as a not doctor, not physician, one gets more scared about what might be possible, what is used even today. You mentioned a little bit last time when we spoke, and I also said, yeah, well, keep it on a leash. Keep AI on a leash. Make it a tool like you would use other tools as a physician.
Yeah, that's a lot of what you said, and that basically were things that, like, questions in my mind as I was writing the book, and that I'm hoping readers are thinking as they read the book. But it's so interesting because I started writing it back in 2016, so before this chatbot era with AI, like ChatGPT, that of course has dominated everything this past year. But my inspiration was so back like in the 2000s and 2010s, there was a big movement in oncology or cancer medicine, which is what I do, for the IBM's Watson AI to try to basically help oncologists. And the goals were good in principle, like basically help us in sorting all the data that comes with, cancer biopsies and uh, reports on the different mutations in the cancer cells and all of this. But after a few years, they found that it really did not do any better job than the doctors. And it kind of all fizzled away quietly. And again, I wasn't personally involved in any of that, but just working as an oncologist, I kind of was following it because I found it quite interesting. And then when I realized it had kind of just fizzled out and disappeared, I wanted to find out why. And then I think, just, working in the US healthcare system for over 20 years. And I've, definitely seen more and more the big, corporate medicine mindset and, profits over patients. And so basically, like my mind that loves reading books like Robin Cook and all these things, like basically just thought of like, okay, you put those two together, like that could make a good book. Like, if there's a company like say in the near future, the AI does what they thought Watson could do. And then, I also just from a like personal standpoint started thinking of all these things like, what if trainees were never taught how to give bad news because the computer would do it? And then what if something goes wrong and then someone who's never done it before and actually has personal reasons to dread having to have that kind of discussion is forced to do it because something goes wrong? And then, like, my first inspiration for my character, who in the first book is a young surgical resident named Hope Kestrel, I had this thought like, she's a doctor named Hope who doesn't believe in hope. And so that was kind of my spark of idea for her. And then so she gets put in this situation. And then from there, I would say it's a, pretty typical trope of a medical thriller, like, trying to find out like what's the corporation hiding and what she finds out. So
Oh, yeah, I can imagine. And the scary thing is, I can also imagine these things really happening in the future.
Well, it's been so interesting this past year with ChatGPT. Like, I have a couple posts on my blogs about these kinds of things, but um, it's so surreal because, like, uh, and there's been some big exposés in, like ProPublica has done a really good job in Stat News. Like, essentially, there are insurance companies that are using algorithms to deny care already, and so there's been these journalistic exposés showing that this is happening, and so I think what I really want readers to think about, and I guess sort of the story question in the book is, who do we want to be in charge of this kind of technology? Because it could do a lot of good, but it also, in the wrong hands, could do a lot of harm. And I think, yeah, it's scary to see. We're already seeing that. You don't have to look very hard to find these stories in the news.
Yeah, unfortunately. And like I said, I can really imagine that going on and on, going further and further, if we do not keep the technology as a tool, keep it on a leash. May I ask, regarding your second book, was it for you? You do not have to answer that question, but I would be interested, of course, to know. Like I said, you don't have to answer. Was it a sort of catharsis for you writing this book?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, both books were, and I think that's probably not too hard to see. And I even sometimes have seen a few reviews where people have mentioned that they imagine the book was a catharsis for me to write. So, Yeah, yeah, I think that's not something that's too far hidden beneath the surface.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for the answer. I imagined that because given what you also said when we spoke the first time and your backstory, and given that you now work in a rural area as a physician.
Yeah, so I do. I work in rural Oregon, so in a small town that basically draws patients in from all the small town
Uh,
areas who either don't want to or can't, who don't have the means to drive 2 hours for their treatment. So
mm, yeah, that's the United States. Vast country. Well, you might have to drive 2 hours for a treatment here as well. Depends on what kind of condition you have, you know.
yeah,
Uh,
sure. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's all a question of money again, isn't it?
Yeah, I think one of the things that leads to moral injury for physicians is, most of us go into this as, starry eyed young people wanting to be healers. And then we, at some point, it's almost like you wake up in this nightmare that you're in this system that does not care one bit for healing. And it's an inherent conflict, I think, on a moral and ethical level when, um, the way healthcare is structured in the United States is for profit. So, yeah, I think we need to start over and build something new. I don't know how to do that though.
Well, believe me, it's getting even here worse. The stories you hear and from friends, family, and so on, what you read in the news, it's not that wonderful anymore as it was, let's say, 30 years ago. So we are catching up
Yeah.
slowly, but still. And Jennifer, since we're also here to talk about your experience as a writer, not just about your book, but also as a writer and your experience as a writer, what can you tell our listeners about yourself as a writer, about writing dialogue, writing descriptions, also your planning process, if you have any at all? Are you a planner? Are you a pantser? People are also interested in this part of your experience when writing your books.
Yeah, sure. So I um started out just the first book just completely as a pantser, as they say, which is that I didn't do any sort of outlining. I just had this story idea and these ideas for characters, and I um, explored it and learned as I wrote. And that process took me several years, like it from again. So I started writing at the end of 2016, and then it was published in March of 2023. So it was a long process to learn how to write fiction, but um, I discovered I had this creative side and this creative outlet that actually was something that I think like mentally I needed in my life. And so, um, I was fortunate enough in 2019 to be selected as part of a mentorship group called Pitch Wars. And so that I feel very fortunate because I met other writers and was paired up with a mentor like in the publishing industry. And um, I think really, I mean, like most things in life, you learn like it's not something you can do alone. Like it's so
Mm.
helpful to have other writing friends and partners. And so with book two and just the process I learned with book one, I would say it was sort of a hybrid between pantsing and plotting. Like I knew my sort of like major plot points, like the first plot point, the transition to act two, and then the midpoint, which is the big shift in your character. But both books, I actually didn't know the ending until I wrote it, and the endings for both like changed several times until I felt like I had like the right ending for the characters. And I know that some readers don't like endings that have a little bit of open-endedness to them, but those are the kinds of books I love. So that's those are the endings I write. Um but for example, and this is just, for any new writers, just so they know they're not alone, like my first ending to Algorithm was like so cheesy. Like it was like happily ever after, like everything's wrapped up in a tidy little bow. And then like as soon as I finished it, I was like so excited, like I finished. And then the next day I was like, that would never happen in the real world. Like I cannot have it end like that. So I scrapped that ending and started rethinking, because I felt like it was actually very tough, because you want to satisfy the reader and you have to have some wrapping up. But then I felt like, just because of the nature of the book, like it wouldn't be realistic to have everything just be like a tidy ending. But then I also felt like it wouldn't be realistic to like have the sort of all the like what we were just talking about, like the potentially bad things that are already happening in the world. Like it wouldn't feel realistic, like to just have all of that get wrapped up as well, even though I know from some of the reviews, maybe some readers would have preferred that. But basically, I guess I should stop talking so I don't give away any spoilers, and just say it's like, um, it has a open-ended, nature.
Yeah, but I agree with you. I mean, real life isn't like that. Watch the news, read the newspapers. When you think, oh yeah, sure, yeah, put him or her on trial, and we all know nothing will ever come of it. Nothing will ever happen to these people, and so on.
Yeah, it's like you said, you don't have to look far.
Oh no, 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 you don't. You probably don't.
Yeah.
And speaking of medical thrillers, and in your free time, your pastime, I mentioned our friend who is a heart surgeon before, and we sometimes talk about those medical shows. And do you watch them and think, okay, give me the popcorn and I can point out after 2 minutes, oh, nothing like that would ever happen. We wouldn't do it like that. And no, 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 they all got it wrong. Or do you think, just hit me and I relax and whatever?
Oh yeah, that's such a fun question. So back when I was in medical school, and again to date myself, but the big series ER
Yeah.
was on, and I loved it. And my husband and I would watch it every week. And then as I got further along in my training and I learned more and I started to see all the things that were unrealistic, like I became more and more irritated as I watched it. But I still watched the series, because then by that point, of course, you're invested in all the characters. But after that, I have not watched any of the big medical shows, because um, it is hard to watch them as a physician when you can point out like all the things that are not accurate. And then also I think it's like, um, just like anyway, like, as a teacher, you might not want to come home and watch a series about teachers, because like you feel like you don't want to feel like you're at work, right? So I think that's the other part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, probably not, no. I
Yeah.
suppose it depends on the show, but you are right, of course. Yeah, yeah, probably. But
I will
some,
say though, I love Scrubs. Scrubs, the comedy Scrubs, they get so much right, like in terms of the characters and the stereotypes and the sort of inside humor, like that. I've actually been thinking about going back and rewatching it, because that show gets a lot right. I love that show.
well, isn't that fascinating? The comedy show gets so much right, whereas others who are supposed or which are supposed to be serious, not so much. But maybe they are more about the drama, like you said, the characters and the relationships.
Yeah.
So they don't focus so much on everything else, probably. And sometimes people ask me, do you watch it in English? And I say, yeah, why not? Because I wouldn't understand what they're talking about if I watch it in German. So why not? I'm not a doctor. I wouldn't know if what they say is correct or not, be it in German or be it in English. So
Sure. Right.
that doesn't matter either way. So you can either
Yeah.
enjoy the fun with Scrubs, or the drama with ER. And Jennifer, what can your readers look forward to?
Oh, well, I am working on my next book. It's slow going because I do still have clinical practice that of course is my priority. So I write mostly on weekends, but a lot of readers have asked if this is going to be a trilogy, if there's another book,
Mm-hmm.
and I wouldn't say I would rule out coming back to it in the future, but right now I really felt like I told the story with these characters I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
tell, and I left them in the place I wanted to leave them. And so I am working on something not in this world. It is I guess I would say it is a speculative thriller, but I'm trying to challenge myself a bit, and so it's not necessarily about doctors, although it it still has like a tie-in like with medical technology. Um so that is in the drafting process, and hopefully at some point down the line will become a finished book. So
Mm.
it's interesting. Like I talk about this with my writing friends, and I'm glad I'm not the only one. But each time even though I'm like, I should know what I'm doing, I've, written and finished two books, but a lot of days I'm like, how did I write two books? Because I don't know what I'm doing with this book. Like it doesn't necessarily get easier.
No.
But of course, that's a lot of that is just like, when it's, hard and are sort of I think people call it either writer's block or imposter syndrome, whatever you want to call it, is just uh sometimes just like just sitting down and making myself write the words is it's hard.
I can imagine. But this new book, it sounds a bit like more set in the future, but also a bit more in a certain genre like sci-fi. Am I completely wrong?
um no, not at all. I would say so it's speculative. It's set like in the present day, and I feel like I'm too early in the process to
Mm-hmm.
actually have like a blurb,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe next year.
Okay, something to look forward to then. And
Yeah.
from the from the writer's point of view, is there a genre which interests you very much, but you are reluctant to dip your toe in?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I don't know. I guess I would say like the genre that I like to read the most just when I'm reading for fun is science fiction for sure. And so I think like in terms of writing, that's definitely where I am drawn, and that's definitely what the first book was, and what this new book is. The Committee Will Kill You Now, I think, was sort of not a digression, but like just because I wanted to tell these characters' story,
Mm-hmm.
that's why I went
Mm-hmm.
back to the past. And I will say I feel very fortunate that I'm with a small press because
Mm-hmm.
they give you that flexibility to write different genres. Because what I've heard from my writing friends that are with big presses is like they very much want you to stay in at least for the first couple of books, to like stay in the same genre. And so you sort of develop your quote unquote brand. And so I guess I didn't do that right, but I just wrote the books that I wanted to write.
Yeah, why not? So you don't write for the market, you write mostly for yourself. It's the book you want to write, it's the story you wanted to tell, and you got the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And as I've developed more experience, I can actually see now that these books, like they don't necessarily fit like in the big market, but I think that's okay because I feel like anytime someone contacts me and I get a review, or just like this morning, like a physician who read the book just emailed me out of the blue and told me how much the algorithm meant to him. And so, I mean, when I first published them, I thought like, nobody's going to ever read these, And so like, it's just, I feel like sometimes it's really hard because of course it's human nature. We want to compare ourselves to others and to other people's success. But then I remind myself, well, that's like really all I wanted when I wrote these is to, I guess like in some ways my goal is to like help other physicians feel seen. And so when I get that feedback, then I just have to remind myself, well, then I've already succeeded because that's really what I was writing for. So.
And for us readers who are no physicians, also this view behind the scenes when you realize, yeah, you are also just human. You're not robots. You are human beings.
Yeah, it's very true. I think that the system is just so hard on patients, and I've been on the patient side too, both for myself and as a parent, and I think that's definitely what I'm drawn to explore with my writing and stories is well, we're all human within this system that is not built really to help humans, if that makes sense.
Yeah. But we shouldn't make it worse by letting AI decide what to do with us, how to help each other. And this also, this gives me the shivers, come to think of sci-fi books or sci-fi films where the machine decides we are the flaw and we are not perfect and we have to be exterminated because of the human error.
Yeah, I think it's certainly something that has been explored a lot in sci-fi. And, so I recently went back and rewatched the movie Elysium with Matt Damon. I don't know if you've seen that one. And it came out like 10 years ago or a little over in 2013. And I know I saw it when it first came out, but it didn't really stick with me. I think it was really like a decade ahead of its time because if you rewatch it now, like it definitely brings in all these themes of like it's only the elite that get the access to the superior healthcare, and then well, I'm going to give just a minor spoiler because the movie's been out over 10 years, but this scene where after Matt Damon gets the radiation poisoning and this robot doctor comes in and just like drops a vial of medication basically on his head. Like it's so callous and well done though. It just like, I don't know. I really enjoyed rewatching it. And so, if people haven't seen it or, haven't given it a watch in 10 years and are interested in like these themes of, basically, yeah, like techno thrillers and conspiracy thrillers, like with medicine and AI, you might enjoy it. So, so I guess those are the things that like get into my psyche that are somewhere in there, like when I write.
Yeah, it's perfectly understandable. And for us as as readers or as people who watch these films, it's scary again. Like I said at the beginning, your books are scary. Rest assured. Well done.
Yeah, well, I definitely want people to know going in, like because and I have content warnings in the beginning of both books because, yeah, I mean, books of all different types can, be triggering for people. And so, I certainly don't want people to read them who it might be triggering or they're not like in the right space where they want to read something like that. So,
Understandable. I'm not talking about triggered because I wasn't triggered, don't worry. But giving what happened in the books, like I said at the beginning, the view behind the curtain, what's going on behind the scenes, it's a bit scary. Especially in also saying it's the God Committee. I mean, it was the sort of the God Committee, wasn't it? I suppose it also felt for the people on the committee like, we're doing God's work now. A teeny tiny bit, at least.
Yeah, it definitely, from the research I did and, like obtaining the original Life magazine article from 1962. And then I was able to find some old, like, basically like 60 minutes specials, like I was able to find and watch on YouTube. And then, some of the things that were then written about it later, like in the 1990s and, even within recent years, like basically just the unfolding of the understanding of everything that was so problematic about it, but also just thinking about the people that were put in that position without a lot of forethought into how that would affect them to be put in that position. And one of the things I tried to kind of create an arc in the book, because that story is told through the journal entries and letters with like the documents in the journal that Noah finds, is I tried to show this unfolding of, for those people, how they went into it like very altruistic, feeling like they or, it was kind of like an honor to be given this position on this committee. And then like it kind of unfolding as they realize like, all of the consequences of being put in that position and being asked to basically play God. And that's, obviously why it came to be called the God Committee.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, this kind of decisions, they're hard to find. And how do you cope with it in the end? Can't imagine. Jennifer, are you also interested in historic medicine? I'm asking this because I've watched this short documentary about one of the Henrys, sometimes in the medieval ages, and there was this interesting information about the physician who treated him because he was hit with an arrow in the face, and he pulled out the arrow and he fought on for another half hour until his comrades pulled him off the battlefield, and the tip of the arrow was still inside and it was very close to the spine, and the physician had to find a way to get it out. And this was so interesting what this physician did, and this tool he invented to get out the tip of the arrow. It was so fascinating.
That does sound fascinating. I'll have to read up on that.
it's called, you can find it on YouTube. It's the History Hit channel. And they used this ballistic jelly to show what happens when, or what supposedly happened when he pulled out the shaft of the arrow, that the muscles were closing in, and he had to reopen the wound, and he had to keep it open because, like I said, he had to come up with a tool. It didn't exist. He invented it himself and get out the tip of the arrow. It was fascinating.
It does sound fascinating.
Yeah, just saying.
Yeah.
There wasn't any blood
the
involved.
Opposite of.
So not the retelling, but
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get it. Yeah. Yeah.
These are the little things that I find most fascinating. Was there ever a time when you thought, oh, why didn't I become a dentist?
Oh, I think every, at least in the US, every MD or DO has probably had that thought. Because at least in the US, I think it's so interesting that uh, dentists have actually, I think, been able to keep their profession kind of independent from the insurance companies. Like they don't have to get prior authorization to, do a root canal or what have you. But the problem in the US is that medical insurance and dental insurance are separate. So, like a lot of people who have medical insurance don't have dental insurance in the United States. And so I see this a lot as a rural cancer physician because a lot of people don't think about or realize how much poor dental health can affect your risk during cancer treatment. Like, but we actually see it a lot, like a lot of dental complications and infections that can become life threatening in your mouth if you don't have the right care. So it's that wasn't the question you asked, but it's a it's a
No,
big problem.
no, but I guess I get where you're coming from. And come to think of it, such a tiny little thing as a tooth and can do so much damage.
Yeah, it's true.
Oh, well, yeah, should be more careful of our teeth. Yeah. Jennifer, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
Oh, one announcement I need to remember to make so my publisher doesn't get mad at me that the audiobook for the first book, The Algorithm Will See You Now, I'm so excited. It just came out yesterday. It's narrated by a wonderful narrator. Her name is Serena Scholl, and it is out on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. So I know that a lot of people, not just in healthcare, but anywhere, like our lives are so busy that don't have, they don't really read books, but they listen to audiobooks. So I can let people know that now the algorithm is available on audiobook.
Perfect. And will the second one, The Committee Will Kill You Now, also come out as an audiobook in the future?
I hope so. It's up to the publisher, but I would be thrilled if they contract the same narrator to do the next one. So I've got my fingers crossed on that.
Same here.
Yeah.
Until then, dear listeners, dear subscribers, read the book. You will absolutely enjoy it. Scary or not, it's absolutely worth your while. This book. Jennifer, I will join you shortly in the green room. Thank you so much for doing this again. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you.
You as well. I had a lot of fun both times. So thank you for having me.
Anytime. I will see you shortly. Dear listeners, we hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And please don't forget to subscribe and like. You can also support us via Buy Me a Coffee and other platforms. And we hope we'll see you again. You will tune in again for the next episode. Until then.